You wouldn't think a Tuesday morning could change your life. For me, it started like any other. The coffee was bitter because I forgot to add sugar again. The kids were bickering over who got to ride shotgun on the way to school, and I was mentally rehearsing the pitch I had to give at work that afternoon. It was mundane, predictable, safe. I dropped off the kids, our daughter Emily and son, Jacob, just in time to avoid a tardy slip. The school looked the same as it always did. A sea of yellow buses, exhausted teachers clutching their morning coffee, and parents waving goodbyes. I saw him there too, standing near the entrance, Mr. Randall. He gave me a polite nod as I drove off, the kind you exchange with someone you've had too many meetings with but don't know well enough to call a friend. Mr. Randall was the fifth-grade teacher who doubled as the school's soccer coach. The kids liked him, and my wife, Lisa, often said he was great with kids. I never gave it much thought. Why would I? To me, he was just another face in a string of parent-teacher conferences and school events. I didn't know then that I'd soon associate him with something entirely different. When I got to work, the usual chaos greeted me. Emails, phone calls, meetings, it was a whirlwind until lunchtime. I finally sat down, scrolling mindlessly through my phone while biting into a cold sandwich, when a notification popped up. Unknown number. The message preview showed part of the text. I can't stop thinking about last night. I frowned, curiosity piqued, and tapped to open the message. I can't stop thinking about last night. I miss you already. When can I see you again? For a second, I assumed it was a wrong number. Someone texting the wrong person, a common mistake. But something gnawed at me, a whisper of suspicion I couldn't ignore. The message wasn't just casual. It felt too personal, too intimate to dismiss easily. I scrolled up to see the sender's number and realized there were no previous conversations. Before I could analyze further, another message popped in, like fate refusing to give me a moment to breathe. Sorry, babe. That wasn't meant for you. Forget you saw it. My heartbeat quickened. My fingers felt clumsy as I stared at the phone, the pieces slowly clicking into place. Forget you saw it? That wasn't the kind of mistake people shrugged off. I didn't recognize the number, but it had to mean something or someone. My gut twisted as a cold wave washed over me. I thought about Lisa. She was home today, working remotely like she often did. We'd been married for 10 years, had 2 kids, and shared a life built on morning routines and Friday movie nights. She wasn't perfect, but she was mine. The idea of her being involved in something this intimate with someone else felt impossible. But the nagging thought wouldn't leave me. I scrolled through the text again. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing, the secrecy, and the apology that followed like a clumsy attempt to erase evidence. I needed to know who it was. I copied the unknown number and pasted it into my phone contacts, hoping to see if it connected with anything. My breath hitched when it synced with a contact. One name appeared on the screen. Mr. Randall. I stared at the name on my phone like it was a bad joke, some kind of glitch that would resolve itself if I blinked hard enough. But when I looked again, it was still there, Mr. Randall. The same man who coached Jacob's soccer team, who handed out gold stars to Emily in class, who had once shaken my hand at parent-teacher night and told me, "You've got great kids." Now he was sending messages meant for my wife. I sat there, frozen. My sandwich sat half-eaten on the desk, forgotten, while my mind spiraled. The office noise, the clicking of keyboards, phones ringing, people chattering, faded into the background like static. I couldn't process it all at once. My wife, our kids' teacher, the man I had unknowingly trusted. I tried to convince myself it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Mr. Randall had the wrong number saved. Maybe this wasn't about Lisa. Maybe. But even as I grasped at those straws, the logic crumbled like a house of cards. The second message had been clear. Forget you saw it. He knew exactly who he had texted. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers drumming against the desk as I thought about what to do next. I couldn't just sit there. I needed confirmation, proof, something that would either shatter my worst fears or allow me to breathe again. Without overthinking it, I left the office, mumbling something about needing fresh air. I walked to the parking lot, slid into my car, and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. My heart was pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I drove home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic lights or the turns I was making. My mind was stuck in a loop of questions I wasn't ready to answer. Lisa's car was parked in the driveway when I pulled up. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at our house. The windows reflected the afternoon sun, giving the place a warm, inviting glow. It looked peaceful, ordinary, just like any other day. But today wasn't ordinary, and the peace I once felt here had been replaced by something darker, something suffocating. I entered the house quietly, my shoes barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, and I could hear Lisa typing away in the home office down the hall. I stood there for a moment, listening to the familiar sound of her fingers tapping the keyboard. She had no idea I was home early, no idea that the cracks in our life were starting to show. I thought about storming in, confronting her right then and there. But what would I even say? I didn't have the full story, and if I accused her without proof, she'd probably just deny it, maybe even laugh it off as some kind of ridiculous misunderstanding. No, I needed something concrete. I made my way to the kitchen and sat at the table, pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen as I debated whether to text or call Mr. Randall. In the end, I settled on a text. I wasn't ready to hear his voice just yet. Who were those messages meant for? I stared at the message, hesitating for a moment before hitting send. My thumb hovered over the screen, second-guessing myself, but it was too late. The message was out there now, and all I could do was wait. It didn't take long. My phone vibrated on the table, and I quickly snatched it up, my pulse racing as I read the reply. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that. It won't happen again." My stomach twisted. That wasn't an answer. It was a dismissal, a coward's way out. I needed him to say it. I needed him to admit it. "Don't play games with me." "Who's the message for?" The response came faster this time, as if he'd been waiting for me to press him. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. It wasn't what I thought? Did he really expect me to believe that after everything I'd seen? I was about to fire off another text when a noise caught my attention. Footsteps. Lisa had left her office and was walking toward the kitchen. I quickly locked my phone and slid it into my pocket just as she appeared in the doorway. She smiled when she saw me, a warm, familiar smile that made my chest tighten. "Hey, you're home early. Everything okay?" I forced a smile in return, the effort making my jaw ache. "Yeah, just needed a break from work." She walked over to the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, her movements so casual, so normal. It was almost enough to make me question everything. "Almost." "Did you eat lunch?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "I wasn't hungry." She frowned but didn't push the issue, sipping her coffee as she leaned against the counter. "The kids will be home soon. Emily has soccer practice, and Jacob has that book report due tomorrow. I was thinking we could order takeout for dinner. Something easy." I nodded, barely processing her words. My mind was elsewhere, running through every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been distant? More secretive? Had I been too wrapped up in work to notice? Lisa set her mug down and walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, familiar, and it made my stomach churn. "You sure you're okay?" I met her gaze, searching for something, guilt, fear, anything that would betray her. But her eyes were steady, concerned, and it threw me off balance. How could someone who looked so calm, so normal, be capable of hiding something so damaging? "I'm fine," I lied, patting her hand before gently pulling away. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting my answer without suspicion. "Go lie down for a bit. I'll take care of things until dinner." I watched her walk back down the hall, her footsteps fading as she returned to her office. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. Mr. Randall hadn't replied to my last message, and the silence felt deafening. I knew I couldn't let this go. Something was happening, something that had been hiding in plain sight for who knows how long. And if I didn't uncover it soon, it would eat me alive. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as I made my way to the bedroom. Once inside, I locked the door and sat on the bed, phone in hand. I wasn't sure where this would lead or how much damage it would cause, but one thing was certain: I couldn't pretend everything was okay. Not anymore. I sat on the bed, the door locked behind me, staring at the phone like it held the key to a hidden world I wasn't sure I wanted to unlock. Mr. Randall's silence was telling. A man who wasn't guilty would have fought harder to explain himself, to deny everything. Instead, he'd left me dangling in the void, and that void was starting to fill with rage. I exhaled sharply, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't a detective, but I didn't need to be one to uncover the truth. I just had to follow the trail. And right now, the trail led straight to Lisa's phone. Sliding my phone into my pocket, I quietly opened the bedroom door and stepped back into the hallway. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of typing coming from Lisa's office. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding with every step as I made my way toward the living room, where she usually left her phone when she worked. Sure enough, it was there, sitting innocently on the coffee table. I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly as I unlocked it using the code I'd known for years. The screen lit up, and for a moment, I hesitated. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. Once I started digging, I couldn't undo what I found. But the memory of Mr. Randall's text pushed me forward. I tapped in her messages. The usual conversations were there, chats with friends, a group text with some other soccer moms, and a thread with her sister about weekend plans. I scrolled past them, looking for anything out of place. Then I saw it, a thread with Mark Randall. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the conversation, my pulse racing. At first, it looked harmless enough. They'd exchanged a few messages about school events, updates on the kids' progress. Nothing unusual. But the further I scrolled, the more the tone shifted. What started as casual exchanges turned into inside jokes, playful banter, and then, "You looked amazing at the game today." I felt a rush of heat crawl up my neck. The message wasn't explicit, but it was intimate. Too intimate. I kept scrolling, my fingers moving faster now, desperate to see the full picture. Wish I could have stayed longer after practice. Seeing you is the best part of my day. You're making me blush. Haha. I shouldn't be smiling at my phone like this. I think about you all the time. The messages became a punch to the gut with every scroll. There was no mention of anything overtly physical, but the undertone was clear. They were flirting, testing boundaries, dancing around something that had probably already gone further than I dared to imagine. Then I hit the message that sent my blood boiling. Last night was incredible. I haven't felt it alive in years. I sat there, the weight of those words pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. My mind flashed to last night. How Lisa had been working late at the office, claiming she had a deadline to meet. She had come home around 10, kissed me on the cheek, and slipped into bed like everything was perfectly normal. I had trusted her. A wave of nausea hit me, but I swallowed it down, my anger simmering beneath the surface. I exited the messages and moved to her call log, searching for more proof. There was several recent calls to and from Mr. Randall. One of them was from the night before. Right around the time she said she was finishing up work, I clenched my fists, the phone shaking in my hands. The betrayal felt raw, like an open wound. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to shatter something, to make noise loud enough to match the chaos inside my head. But I forced myself to stay calm. Bursting into a fit of rage now wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed a plan. I put her phone back on the coffee table, exactly where I'd found it, and walked back to the bedroom, locking the door once again. Sitting on the bed, I pulled out my own phone and opened Mr. Randall's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I stopped myself. No, not yet. If I confronted him now, I'd give him a chance to spin his story, to feed me more lies. I needed to hear from Lisa first. The sound of the front door opening pulled me out of my thoughts. The kids were home from school, their voices filling the house as they dropped their backpacks in the entryway. Lisa's voice followed, warm and cheerful as she greeted them. I could picture the scene perfectly, her smiling, kissing their foreheads, asking about their day. It was a performance she'd perfected, one that I'd bought into for years. But now, I saw through it. I stayed in the bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed for me. My world had shifted, and there was no going back to the version of myself that had walked out of this house earlier that morning. After a while, the noise died down, and I heard Lisa call out, "Dinner in an hour." She didn't come looking for me, probably assuming I was resting like I told her earlier. Good. I needed the time to think. I grabbed my laptop and started digging deeper. I checked the family's shared calendar, where Lisa often logged events and appointments. I searched for any gaps, any unexplained outings that might match the timing of her texts with Mr. Randall. It didn't take long to find them. Several evenings marked as work meetings or yoga class. Yoga. I almost laughed at the irony. She had convinced me to pay for that expensive membership, claiming it was her way of finding balance after the stress of motherhood. I had believed her. I pulled up her email next, scanning through messages, but most of it was harmless: receipts, newsletters, reminders. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more hidden somewhere, something I hadn't yet uncovered. Just then, I heard Lisa's footsteps approaching the bedroom. I quickly shut the laptop and placed it on the nightstand, lying back on the bed just as she knocked on the door. "You feeling any better?" she asked through the door. "Yeah," I called back. "Just needed to rest." "Dinner's almost ready," she said before walking away. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tonight, I'd sit through dinner, pretend everything was fine, and play the role of the oblivious husband. But after the kids went to bed, there would be no more pretending. Tonight, I was going to confront her, and this time, there would be no denying it. Dinner was a blur of small talk and forced smiles. Emily chattered about her upcoming science project. Jacob complained about his math homework, and Lisa nodded along, offering the usual encouragement. I barely spoke, stabbing at my plate without tasting a thing. My mind wasn't in that room. It was already planning the conversation that would happen once the kids were asleep. Lisa didn't seem to notice my silence. Or maybe she did and chalked it up to the tired excuse I'd given earlier. Either way, she acted like everything was perfectly normal, passing me the breadbasket, reminding Jacob to eat his vegetables, and giggling when Emily made a joke about her teacher's weird shoes. It was all so domestic, so routine, but to me, it was suffocating. I wanted to shake her, scream, demand answers right there at the dinner table. But I held it in, not because I didn't have the nerve, but because I needed this confrontation to happen on my terms. Once the kids had finished eating, Lisa sent them upstairs to get ready for bed. I cleared the table, using the task to keep my hands busy. My mind ran through possible scenarios. Would she admit it right away, or would she cling to her denial like a drowning person clings to a life raft? The clinking of dishes brought me back to the present. Lisa was at the sink, humming softly as she rinsed plates. I watched her from across the room, taking in the woman I'd spent the last decade of my life with. She didn't look like someone hiding a secret. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, a few strands falling across her face. Her oversized sweater hung lazily off one shoulder, and her cheeks were still flushed from the heat of the kitchen. But I knew better now. People don't wear their guilt on the outside. They carry it in the cracks they hope no one will notice. When the kitchen was clean and the kids had gone to bed, I followed her into the living room. She curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while I stood by the doorway, silently watching her. My fists clenched at my sides, and I could feel the storm brewing inside me. It was time. "Lisa," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked up, startled. "Yeah." I didn't sit down. I stayed where I was, looming over her, my gaze locked on hers. "We need to talk." Her expression shifted, a flicker of something. Concern, confusion, maybe even fear, crossing her face. "Is everything okay?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked it, scrolling to the screenshot of the messages Mr. Randall had sent me earlier. I held it out to her, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Explain this?" She took the phone, her eyes scanning the messages. Her face paled, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the screen, as if willing the words to change. When she finally looked up, her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Who is it for, Lisa?" I pressed, my voice cold and unforgiving. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "It's not what you think." There was the first line of defense. Denial. I had expected it, but hearing it still made my blood boil. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said, my voice low but dangerous. I know it's for you. I know you've been talking to him. Her fingers tightened around the phone, and she let out a shaky breath. Mark and I. She stopped herself, as if saying his name out loud made it too real. We were just talking. It didn't mean anything. Talking? I scoffed, taking a step closer. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been doing a hell of a lot more than talking. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let them sway me. I'd seen her cry before, during arguments, at funerals, even during sappy movies. But this time, her tears felt like a tactic, a way to deflect from the truth. I swear, she whispered, her voice cracking. Nothing happened. I know how it looks, but it was just texts. I was lonely, okay? I cut her off, my anger bubbling over. Lonely? Is that the excuse you're going with? We have 2 kids, a home, a life together, and you're lonely? I laughed bitterly. Do you even hear yourself? Her shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. The image of her with Mr. Randall, sneaking around behind my back, was burned into my mind. Did you sleep with him? I asked, my voice steady but laced with venom. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I swear I didn't. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the truth. But all I saw was a woman backed into a corner, desperate to save herself. You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen, after the lies you've already told? She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her sweater, her breathing ragged. I made a mistake, she whispered. But it wasn't what you think. It never went that far. I crossed my arms, the silence between us thick and suffocating. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that this betrayal hadn't been physical. But the evidence was stacked against her, and my gut told me there was more to the story. Then explain the messages, I said, my tone firm. Explain why he's talking about last night, why he can't stop thinking about you. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. I don't know, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a mistake. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. But it's over now. I ended it. I laughed bitterly. You ended it? When, Lisa? Before or after he accidentally sent me a message meant for you? She looked away, her silence confirming what I already knew. You were never going to end it, were you? I asked, my voice hard. If he hadn't messed up, you'd still be sneaking around, still lying to me, still texting him. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not now. Not when the trust we had built over a decade had been shattered in a single day. I was going to tell you, she said through her tears. I just didn't know how. I shook my head, disgusted. No, you weren't. You weren't going to tell me anything. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with each sob. I turned away, unable to watch her crumble. My fists clenched at my sides, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, anger, and confusion. I needed air, space, something to clear my head before I said or did something I couldn't take back. Without another word, I walked to the door, grabbed my coat, and left the house. Her cries echoed behind me as I stepped into the cold night air, but I didn't look back. The truth was out now, but the war was far from over. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked down the street, but I barely noticed. My mind was a whirlwind of questions with no answers, thoughts spinning like a storm I couldn't control. The houses lining our neighborhood were quiet, their windows glowing with warmth and normalcy, as if the world outside my head hadn't shifted beneath my feet. I kept walking, each step heavy, as I replayed the confrontation in my mind. The tears in Lisa's eyes, the trembling in her voice, the excuses she'd tried to offer, all of it churned inside me. I didn't believe her. How could I? The messages, the calls, the lies about where she'd been, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate betrayal. I didn't know how long I walked before I found myself standing in front of the small park where I used to take the kids when they were little. The playground was empty now, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. I sat on one of the benches, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees, my breath forming clouds in the cold night air. I pulled out my phone and stared at Mr. Randall's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button again, the temptation to confront him growing stronger. But what would I even say? Yelling at him wouldn't erase what he'd done. It wouldn't make Lisa's betrayal disappear. But it would feel good. I hit the call button before I could second-guess myself, my heart pounding as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then finally he picked up. "Hello." His voice was cautious, like he already knew who it was. "It's me," I said, my voice cold. "We need to talk." He was silent for a moment, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. "Look, man, I didn't mean for things to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you or your family." I laughed bitterly. "Funny how you say that after you've already done it. I swear it wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice desperate. "It just Lisa and we didn't plan this. It wasn't like that." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Then tell me what it was like. Explain to me how you went from being my kid's teacher to sneaking around with my wife." He hesitated, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he searched for an explanation that wouldn't make him sound like the scumbag he was. "It started with the school meetings," he admitted quietly. "We talked a lot about the kids, and then it just turned into something else. I didn't mean for it to happen, but you didn't stop it either." I finished for him, my voice filled with venom. "Don't act like this was some accident. You made a choice, and so did she." He exhaled sharply. "I'm sorry, okay? I know that doesn't fix anything, but I ended it. I told Lisa we couldn't keep doing this. When? I demanded. When did you end it? Exactly? Last week," he said, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. I realized it was a mistake, and I didn't want to ruin her life. Or yours. I clenched my jaw, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. "Too late for that. You've already ruined everything." Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Part of me wanted to keep going, to unleash every bit of anger I had on him. But what would be the point? He was just a symptom of the real problem, Lisa. I ended the call without another word, shoving the phone back into my pocket. My breath came out in shaky bursts as I tried to calm myself. The confrontation hadn't given me the satisfaction I'd hoped for. If anything, it had only made the betrayal feel more real, more permanent. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. The stars were out, distant and indifferent, twinkling like they didn't care that my life was falling apart. And why would they? This wasn't some grand cosmic event. It was just another story of betrayal, another broken marriage. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up and made my way back home. The house was dark when I arrived, the lights turned off except for the soft glow coming from the living room. I stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind me. Lisa was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up when she heard me, her face crumbling with relief or maybe fear. I couldn't tell which. "Where did you go?" she asked softly. "Out," I said, my voice emotionless. She wiped her eyes and sat up, clutching the blanket like it was a shield. "I thought." Her voice broke, and she shook her head. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I'm here," I said, but the words felt hollow. Physically, I was standing in front of her, but emotionally, I was miles away. Lisa stood up, taking a tentative step toward me. "Please, just talk to me. We can fix this." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Fix it? How do you expect me to fix something that's already broken?" Her lips trembled, and fresh tears welled up in her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "I made a mistake, but I never stopped loving you. You have to believe me." I stared at her, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who had betrayed me. I didn't know what to believe anymore. "Love isn't supposed to feel like this," I said, my voice cold. "It's not supposed to come with secrets and lies." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not when the wound was still so fresh, still bleeding. "I need time," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this right now." Lisa dropped her hands, her tear-streaked face looking up at me with desperation. "What does that mean? Are you leaving?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't sit here and pretend like nothing happened." She nodded slowly, as if she understood, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "Just don't shut me out completely," she pleaded. "We can get through this. For the kids." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past her, heading upstairs to the guest room. The bed was cold, the room unfamiliar, but it was better than lying next to her. I couldn't be near her, not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind kept replaying the same question. Could I ever trust her again? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. I avoided Lisa, heading straight to the kitchen for coffee, my thoughts swirling. I couldn't shake the image of her pleading face from the night before, but I also couldn't forget the texts, the calls, or the lies she'd fed me. While the kids ate breakfast, oblivious to the tension thick in the air, Lisa stayed in the living room, scrolling through her phone like it was a lifeline. I watched her from the corner of my eye, wondering if she was texting him again. The thought gnawed at me. After dropping the kids off at school, I circled back home. Lisa was gone, probably out running errands, or so she'd claim. I went straight to her office, my pulse quickening as I searched for anything she hadn't deleted. I found it hidden in a private folder on her laptop. Messages, pictures of her and Randall at a cafe, and a few calendar invites to private meetings. The evidence was damning. It wasn't just emotional. It had crossed into something physical. The pictures told me everything her words hadn't. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. My breathing felt shallow, like the walls were closing in. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. She had lied to me again last night, even when I'd given her the chance to come clean. The rage I'd managed to contain exploded within me. She thought this was over? Not yet. Not until I made sure they both regretted ever betraying me. By the time Lisa came home, I was ready. I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me, her messages and photos displayed on the screen like a confession laid bare. She walked in, saw me, and froze. Her eyes flicked to the laptop, and I saw the color drain from her face. "Sit," I said, my voice cold and unrecognizable, even to me. Her body moved mechanically, like she had no choice but to obey. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, her hands trembling as she clasped them on the table. "You lied again," I said, my gaze never leaving hers. "Last night, you swore it wasn't physical. But this," I gestured to the screen, "this tells a different story." Tears streamed down her face, but I wasn't moved. "I couldn't be. I didn't know how to tell you," she stammered. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "That I'd find out the truth? Or that I'd finally see who you really are?" Her sobs grew louder, but I pressed on. "When did it start? How long have you been lying to me?" 6 months, she whispered, as if saying it any louder would destroy her. "It wasn't supposed to be this way. I ended it. I swear." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "You ended it because you got caught. Don't act like this was your choice." Her silence confirmed what I already knew. "You didn't just betray me," I continued, my voice steady but filled with venom. "You betrayed our family. Our kids. I'll do anything to fix this," she pleaded. "Please don't throw away everything we've built." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You already threw it away, Lisa. I'm just picking up the pieces." I stood, leaving her sobbing at the table. I walked upstairs, grabbed my bag, and packed what I needed for the night. As I headed for the door, she followed, clinging to my arm like it was her last chance to stop me. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't leave. We can work through this." I pulled away, my heart hardened. "You worked through it with him. Now, you'll live with the consequences." I left without looking back. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, but this time, I welcomed it. It was sharp and biting, just like the truth I'd uncovered. As I drove away, one thought echoed in my mind. This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something new, something on my terms. And neither Lisa nor Randall would escape unscathed.